What happens when three-star athletes think they can prey on the quiet new girl? They had no idea that Emma Rodriguez could break concrete blocks with her bare hands. This is the story of how a hidden martial arts champion turned the tables on her tormentors in the most spectacular way imaginable, and why the aftermath shocked an entire school district. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma Rodriguez had been staring at the sprawling brick facade of Riverside Valley High School for exactly 17 minutes, watching students stream through the main entrance like water rushing through a dam. The Colorado mountain air carried the crisp bite of early October, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the rhythmic thud of footballs hitting practice dummies. Her father's job transfer had ripped her away from everything familiar in San Diego, landing her family in this picture-perfect town where Friday night lights seemed to cast shadows over everything else. She adjusted the straps of her worn leather backpack, the same one that had carried her textbooks through 3 years at Lincoln High, where nobody knew that the quiet girl in the back row could execute a perfect spinning heel kick or that she held a third-degree black belt in Kyokushin Karate. Those days felt like a distant memory now, replaced by the daunting prospect of starting over in a place where she knew absolutely no one. The hallways of Riverside Valley buzzed with the kind of energy that comes from long-established social hierarchies. Emma navigated through clusters of students who seemed to move with the confidence of people who had known each other since kindergarten. Trophy cases lined the main corridor, gleaming with golden footballs, wrestling medals, and photographs of championship teams dating back decades. The message was clear. Athletic achievement was the currency that mattered most in this building. Her first period chemistry class provided a welcome refuge from the social minefield of the hallways. Emma slipped into a lab station near the back, methodically arranging her notebook and pens with the same precision she applied to practicing kata forms. The teacher, Mrs. Patterson, seemed competent enough, and Emma found herself genuinely interested in the discussion about molecular bonding. When it came time to pair up for the lab exercise, a girl with dark curly hair and intelligent brown eyes approached her table. "Mind if I work with you? I'm Sophia Martinez, and you look like someone who actually pays attention to the instructions instead of trying to create accidental explosions." The girl's smile was warm and genuine, the first truly friendly gesture Emma had encountered since walking through the school doors. Emma Rodriguez. And yes, I definitely prefer controlled chemical reactions. Emma felt some of the tension in her shoulders begin to ease as they worked together, measuring solutions and recording observations. Sophia had an easy way of talking that filled the awkward spaces, sharing amusing observations about their classmates and teachers without crossing into mean-spirited gossip. "So what brought you to our little mountain paradise?" Sophia asked, as they waited for their solution to change color. "Dad's company transferred him to manage the regional office in Denver. We're living about 20 minutes outside town." Emma carefully pipetted another drop of indicator into their beaker. "What's the real story about this place? I mean, beyond the obvious football obsession." Sophia glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "Riverside Valley is basically run by 3 families who've been here since the town was founded. The Morrisons own the biggest car dealership and most of the commercial real estate. The Hayes family controls the construction business, and the Sullivans have the largest ranch operation in the county. Their kids rule the school, especially Tyler Morrison and his crew. Let me guess, football players? Tyler's the quarterback, Jake Sullivan plays running back, and Connor Hayes is on the receiving corps. They're actually talented athletes, which makes them basically untouchable around here. The whole town revolves around Friday night games. And these 3 are the golden boys who bring home the championships." Emma nodded, filing away this information. She had encountered similar dynamics at her previous school, though perhaps not quite so concentrated. And the teachers just go along with it? Most of them. A few try to maintain some standards, but the pressure from parents and administration is pretty intense. When your family donates $50,000 for new equipment, your kid tends to get the benefit of the doubt in any dispute. Sophia's tone carried a note of frustration that suggested she had witnessed this favoritism firsthand. The bell rang, interrupting their conversation, but Emma felt a spark of hope that she might have found a genuine friend in this new environment. Sophia scribbled her phone number on a piece of paper and handed it over with another one of those warm smiles. Text me if you want someone to show you around or if you need help navigating the social minefield. Trust me, there are plenty of good people here once you know where to look. Emma's next few classes passed in a blur of introductions, syllabus explanations, and the subtle art of choosing where to sit in rooms full of strangers. She had developed a strategy over the years of positioning herself near the middle of the classroom, close enough to show engagement, but not so prominent as to draw unwanted attention. Her teachers seemed competent and fair, though she noticed how their voices took on a different tone when addressing certain students whose letterman jackets marked them as members of the athletic elite. Lunch period presented the greatest challenge yet. The cafeteria stretched out like a vast social laboratory, with invisible but clearly defined territories marked by clothing, conversation volume, and the subtle signs of inclusion and exclusion. Emma grabbed a turkey sandwich and a bottle of water, scanning the room for an available seat that wouldn't require navigating complex social negotiations. She spotted Sophia waving from a table near the windows and felt a rush of relief. As she approached, she could see that Sophia was sitting with a diverse group of students who seemed to be engaged in an animated discussion about weekend plans. There was David Park, a junior with carefully styled black hair who always seemed to have a camera hanging around his neck, and Maria Santos, a senior who Emma recognized from her calculus class. Emma. Perfect timing. We were just debating whether the hiking trail up to Eagle Point is actually worth the 3-hour climb, or if David is just trying to get us to pose for his photography portfolio in scenic locations. David laughed and adjusted his camera strap. Hey, my portfolio needs variety. Besides, the view from up there is incredible, especially with the fall colors right now. You should come with us this Saturday, Emma. Best way to get a feel for the area. Emma found herself genuinely considering the invitation when a sudden silence fell over their section of the cafeteria. She looked up to see 3 young men approaching their table, moving with the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having been told no. Tyler Morrison led the group, his blonde hair perfectly styled and his letterman jacket hanging open to display a physique that clearly spent significant time in the weight room. Jake Sullivan flanked his right side, broader and more heavily built, with the kind of easy smile that probably charmed teachers and parents alike. Connor Hayes brought up the rear, smaller than his companions, but carrying himself with an aggressive energy that seemed barely contained. Well, looks like we've got ourselves a new student. Tyler's voice carried clearly across the suddenly quiet space around their table. I'm Tyler Morrison. You picked an interesting group to sit with on your first day. Emma could feel the eyes of nearby students turning toward their table, and she sensed the complex dynamics at work in the sudden shift in atmosphere. Sophia's posture had tensed slightly, and David's hand moved protectively toward his camera as if he expected trouble. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma Rodriguez, she replied evenly, meeting Tyler's gaze without backing down. Nice to meet you. Rodriguez, huh? You're not from around here. Jake's tone was friendly enough on the surface, but Emma caught the subtle undertone that suggested this was somehow significant. San Diego originally. My family just moved here a few weeks ago. Connor stepped forward slightly, his eyes scanning Emma with an intensity that made her skin crawl. California girl, huh? I bet you're used to a very different kind of scene. Out there, things are more traditional here in Colorado. We take care of our own, if you know what I mean. Emma felt a familiar sensation, the same heightened awareness that came during sparring sessions when she needed to read her opponent's intentions. Years of martial arts training had taught her to recognize the subtle signs of aggression, and every instinct was telling her that this encounter was heading somewhere unpleasant. "I'm sure I'll figure out how things work here," she said calmly, taking a small bite of her sandwich to project nonchalance she didn't entirely feel. Tyler's smile never wavered, but something shifted in his eyes. "See, that's where you might need some guidance. Sophia and her friends here, they're not exactly part of the main social scene. You seem like someone who might appreciate being included in the right circles. I'm perfectly happy with the company I've found, thanks." Emma's voice remained steady, but she could feel her heart rate beginning to increase. The predatory energy emanating from the three young men was becoming impossible to ignore. Jake laughed, a sound that didn't contain much genuine humor. "That's cute, you've got spirit." "Tyler likes spirit in a girl, don't you, Tyler?" "Absolutely. But spirit needs to be channeled in the right direction." Tyler leaned forward slightly, placing his hands on the table in a gesture that brought him uncomfortably close to Emma's personal space. "Why don't you sit with us tomorrow? We can show you how things really work around here." Emma could see Sophia's jaw clench from the corner of her eye, and she sensed that her new friend wanted to say something but was restraining herself. David had gone very still, his photographer's instincts apparently telling him to document the moment while staying as invisible as possible. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm good where I am." Emma's tone remained polite but firm, the same voice she used when declining to spar with overly aggressive partners at her dojo back home. Connor's expression darkened at her refusal. "You sure about that? It's a big school, lots of ways for a new student to have a hard time if she doesn't make the right friends." The implicit threat hung in the air like smoke, and Emma felt her muscles begin to tense in the way they did when she was preparing for combat. But this wasn't the controlled environment of a dojo, where rules were clear and respected. This was a public space filled with witnesses, and she knew that any physical response would likely be turned against her. "I think I can handle myself," she said quietly, meeting Connor's stare with the same calm focus she used when breaking boards. Tyler straightened up, his smile becoming more pronounced but somehow less warm. "Well, Emma Rodriguez from San Diego. I guess we'll see about that. Enjoy your lunch with the chess club." The three of them walked away as casually as they had arrived, but Emma could feel their eyes on her for several long moments afterward. The normal buzz of cafeteria conversation gradually resumed, but she noticed that many students were still shooting glances toward their table. "Wow," David said quietly, lowering his camera. "That was something." Tyler Morrison doesn't usually get turned down quite so directly. Sophia reached across the table and squeezed Emma's hand. "You handled that perfectly. Don't let them intimidate you. They're used to people either fawning over them or being too scared to stand up to them." "What exactly did I just walk into?" Emma asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Tyler and his crew have a pattern." Maria Santos spoke up for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "They target new girls, especially ones who don't immediately fall in line with the social hierarchy. They like the challenge of breaking them in." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Colorado mountain air. "Breaking them in?" David glanced around nervously before responding. "There have been incidents. Girls who complained about unwanted attention, harassment, sometimes worse. But Tyler's dad practically owns half the town, and Jake's family has been here for generations. Complaints tend to disappear, and the girls usually transfer schools or just endure it until graduation. The administration doesn't do anything." Sophia's laugh was bitter. Principal Thompson depends on the Booster Club donations to fund everything from new textbooks to facility improvements. The Morrison family alone contributes more than most businesses. She's not going to jeopardize that relationship over student complaints that can't be definitively proven. Emma absorbed this information with growing anger. She had encountered bullies before, but the systematic nature of what Sophia was describing went far beyond typical teenage social dynamics. This was an abuse of power protected by money and community status. Has anyone ever fought back? Few have tried, David said. Last year, a senior named Jessica Walsh tried to file a formal complaint after Tyler cornered her at a party. Within a week, rumors started spreading about her being unstable, using drugs, making false accusations. For attention, her family ended up moving to Grand Junction before the school year was over. Emma felt her hands clench into fists under the table, a reflexive response that she quickly controlled. Years of martial arts training had taught her that true strength came from discipline and choosing the right moment to act, not from emotional reactions. So they just get away with whatever they want? Pretty much, Sophia confirmed. The thing is, they're actually good at football. Tyler has scholarship offers from 3 Division I schools. Jake is probably going to follow him to college on his own athletic merit. Connor's trying desperately to earn his own scholarship and will do anything to stay in Tyler's good graces. The whole town sees them as heroes who are going to put Riverside Valley on the map. Emma spent the rest of lunch listening to her new friends share more details about the power dynamics that governed their school. It was a depressing picture of institutional corruption disguised as school spirit, where athletic achievement trumped basic human decency and wealthy families could essentially purchase immunity for their children's misconduct. When the bell rang signaling the end of lunch period, Emma gathered her things with a heavy heart. She had hoped that starting over in a new place might offer a chance to focus purely on academics and perhaps find a local dojo where she could continue her martial arts training. Instead, she found herself walking into what appeared to be a carefully constructed system designed to protect predators and silence their victims. Her afternoon classes passed in a haze of distraction as she processed what she had learned. During English literature, she found herself analyzing the power dynamics in the assigned reading of Lord of the Flies with new relevance, seeing uncomfortable parallels between the fictional breakdown of civilization and the social hierarchy that seemed to govern Riverside Valley High School. When the final bell rang, Emma made her way to her locker, planning to gather her textbooks and head home where she could process the day's events in private. The hallways had largely emptied, with most students either heading to after-school activities or rushing to catch buses. She was surprised to hear footsteps approaching as she worked the combination on her lock. "Emma, right? Mind if I have a word?" She turned to see a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair streaked through otherwise dark brown locks. The woman wore a simple blouse and cardigan and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to. "I'm Ms. Kim. I teach American history. I wanted to introduce myself because I noticed you handled yourself very well during the lunch period encounter today." Emma felt a moment of surprise. "You saw that? I have lunch duty on Tuesdays, so I keep an eye on the cafeteria dynamics. What Tyler Morrison and his friends did was inappropriate, and I wanted you to know that not all the adults in this building are willing to look the other way." Relief flooded through Emma's chest. "Thank you for saying that. I was starting to wonder if anyone in authority cared about what goes on here." Miss Kim glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard, then stepped closer. "Can I ask you something?" You moved with a kind of controlled awareness during that confrontation that reminded me of someone with martial arts training. Am I right? Emma hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to someone she had just met. But something in Ms. Kim's demeanor suggested genuine concern rather than idle curiosity. "I've been studying karate since I was 7. third-degree black belt, in Kyokushin style. Ms. Kim's eyes widened slightly. That's impressive. Kyokushin is not a gentle art form. You must be quite skilled. My sensei always taught us that the highest level of martial arts is avoiding conflict, not winning it. But sometimes, Emma trailed off, thinking about Tyler's predatory smile and Connor's barely concealed aggression. Sometimes conflict finds you whether you want it or not, Ms. Kim finished. I understand that philosophy. I studied Tang Soo Do for several years before I got married and started teaching full-time. The discipline and mental focus serve you well in many situations beyond self-defense. Emma felt a spark of connection with this teacher who seemed to understand both the technical and philosophical aspects of martial arts training. Ms. Kim, can I ask you something? How bad is the situation here with Tyler and his friends? I mean, how long has this been going on? Ms. Kim's expression grew troubled. Too long, and it's getting worse. Tyler's father has been on the school board for 6 years, and his influence has grown significantly during that time. The Morrison family's donations fund a substantial portion of our athletic programs, and that financial leverage translates into protection for Tyler's behavior. What about the other teachers? Surely some of them must see what's happening. Many do, but speaking up has consequences. 2 years ago, Mr. Henderson in the math department tried to document a pattern of harassment and submitted a formal report to the administration. He was transferred to the middle school the following semester, ostensibly for budget reasons. The message was received clearly by the rest of us. Emma felt her anger building again, but she forced herself to maintain the calm breathing. Techniques she had learned through years of meditation practice. So students are just supposed to endure whatever Tyler and his friends decide to do to them. Not if I can help it, Ms. Kim said firmly. But change has to be approached strategically. Direct confrontation with the administration typically backfires unless you have absolutely irrefutable evidence and community support. Even then, it's an uphill battle. Emma nodded, appreciating both the honesty and the implied offer of support. Thank you for telling me this, and for reaching out. Emma, I want you to know that my classroom is always open if you need a safe space to think or talk. Room 204 in the history wing. I'm here most days until at least 4:30. As Ms. Kim walked away, Emma felt a mixture of gratitude and determination settling in her chest. At least she wasn't completely alone in this situation. She finished gathering her books and headed toward the exit, but as she passed the gymnasium complex, she noticed a door marked Dance Studio, Authorized Personnel Only, standing slightly ajar. Curiosity getting the better of her, Emma glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then slipped through the doorway. The room beyond was clearly unused, with mirrors covering one wall and a sound system that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1990s. Dust motes danced in the afternoon, sunlight streaming through high windows, and the wooden floor showed the scuff marks of long-abandoned dance classes. Emma set down her backpack and moved to the center of the space, feeling the familiar call of muscle memory. Almost without conscious thought, she began moving through the opening movements of her favorite kata, Sanshin, letting the precise techniques flow through her body like a meditation in motion. The stress and uncertainty of the day began to dissolve as she lost herself in the rhythm of controlled breathing and deliberate movement. She was halfway through the form when she heard the sound of slow clapping behind her. Well, what do we have here? Emma spun around to find Tyler Morrison leaning against the doorframe, his Letterman jacket now replaced by workout clothes that showed off his impressive physique. Jake and Connor flanked him on either side, blocking the only exit from the room. Looks like our new California girl has some hidden talents, Connor said, his voice carrying an ugly undertone that made Emma's skin crawl. That was some pretty fancy dancing, Jake added with a smirk. You'll have to show us some more moves sometime. Emma felt her heart rate spike, but her training kicked in automatically. She shifted into a ready stance, weight balanced in hands, positioned for defense, while keeping her expression calm and neutral. "I was just leaving," she said evenly, moving toward the door. Tyler stepped forward, blocking her path more directly. "Now hold on. We came all the way down here to have a private conversation with you. The least you can do is hear us out. I don't think we have anything to discuss." "Oh, but we do." Tyler's smile had taken on the same predatory quality she had seen in the cafeteria. "See, you embarrassed us at lunch today. Made us look bad in front of the whole school. That's not something we can just let slide." Emma could feel the familiar pre-fight energy beginning to build in her muscles, the same sensation she experienced during tournament competition. But this wasn't a controlled environment with referees and rules. This was 3 larger opponents in an isolated space with no witnesses. "I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. I just wanted to eat my lunch in peace." Connor laughed harshly. "Peace? You think you can just waltz into our school and disrespect us without consequences? That's not how things work around here, California. What exactly do you want from me?" Emma asked, stalling for time while she assessed her options. The door was blocked, but the room was large enough to maneuver. If she could get them spread out, she might be able to use their overconfidence against them. "It's simple," Tyler said, taking another step closer. "You apologize for your attitude at lunch, and then you show us some of those impressive moves you were doing when we walked in. Consider it a private demonstration." Emma felt ice forming in her stomach as Tyler's intentions became crystal clear. This wasn't just about social hierarchy or wounded pride. This was about power and control, about 3 young men who had never been told no, using their protected status to victimize someone they saw as vulnerable. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said carefully, shifting her weight to her back foot in preparation for movement. "I'm not interested in any kind of demonstration." Jake moved to her left while Connor circled to her right, the classic pincer movement of predators who had clearly done this before. Emma's training automatically cataloged their positions, reach advantages, and potential weaknesses while her conscious mind desperately searched for a way to de-escalate the situation. "Come on, don't be shy," Tyler said, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "We just want to see what all that fancy California training can do. Maybe you can teach us a few things." Emma realized with crystal clarity that there was no talking her way out of this situation. Tyler and his friends had made their decision before they ever entered the room, and her refusal to submit was only increasing their determination to assert their dominance. Years of martial arts philosophy warred with immediate survival instincts as she faced the most dangerous moment of her young life. "Last chance to walk away," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of authority that came from years of disciplined training. Tyler's laugh was genuinely amused. "Walk away? From a little girl playing dress-up as a fighter? I don't think so." He reached out to grab her arm, and Emma Rodriguez made the decision that would change everything at Riverside Valley High School forever. The moment Tyler's fingers made contact with Emma's forearm, 15 years of disciplined training exploded into action. Her body moved with the fluid precision of countless hours spent perfecting technique, executing a textbook wrist escape that sent Tyler stumbling backward with a shocked expression replacing his predatory smile. The sudden reversal of power dynamics hung in the dusty air of the abandoned dance studio like electricity before a thunderstorm. Connor reacted first, lunging forward with the kind of wild aggression that spoke more to desperation than skill. Emma sidestepped smoothly, redirecting his momentum with a gentle push that sent him crashing into the mirrored wall with enough force to spider-web the glass. Jake hesitated for a crucial second, clearly reassessing the situation as his 2 companions struggled to understand how their carefully planned intimidation had gone so spectacularly wrong. "What the hell?" Tyler snarled, rubbing his wrist where Emma's grip had left red marks on his skin. "You think you're some kind of tough girl?" Emma settled into a classical ready stance, her breathing controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Years of tournament competition had taught her to maintain mental clarity even in high-stress situations, and she found herself automatically assessing her opponents with the cold calculation of someone trained to exploit weaknesses. "I tried to walk away," she said calmly, her voice carrying none of the fear that Tyler was clearly expecting. "You chose to make this physical." Jake finally moved, attempting to grab her from behind while she was focused on Tyler. Emma heard his approaching footsteps and spun into a perfect back fist strike that caught him across the jaw with enough force to snap his head sideways. He dropped to one knee, blood trickling from his split lip as he stared up at her with a mixture of pain and disbelief. Connor had recovered from his collision with the mirror and was advancing again, but this time with more caution. Emma could see him trying to process what he was witnessing, his small brain struggling to reconcile the quiet new girl from lunch with the skilled fighter who had just dismantled his two friends with embarrassing ease. "This is impossible," Connor muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "Girls don't fight like this." Emma almost smiled at his confusion. In her experience, men who relied on intimidation and physical dominance often had the most difficulty adapting when their victims refused to play the expected role. Tyler and his friends had clearly never encountered genuine resistance before, let alone someone with the skills to back up their defiance. Tyler was circling now, trying to find an angle of attack that might give him an advantage. Emma tracked his movement while keeping Connor in her peripheral vision, her body automatically shifting to maintain optimal positioning. The years of sparring against multiple opponents in her dojo had prepared her for exactly this kind of situation. "You made a big mistake, California," Tyler said, his voice tight with anger and wounded pride. "Do you have any idea who you're messing with? My father owns half this town. When we're done here, you're going to wish you'd never set foot in Colorado." Emma felt a familiar calm settling over her mind, the same focused state she entered during competition. Tyler's threats only confirmed what she had already suspected about his character, and his reliance on his family's influence revealed a fundamental weakness that she could exploit. "Your father isn't here right now," she replied evenly. "It's just you, your friends, and the consequences of your choices." Connor made his move then, attempting a wild haymaker that would have been devastating if it had connected. Emma ducked smoothly under the punch and drove her elbow upward into his solar plexus, a technique that dropped him to the floor gasping for breath. The sound of his body hitting the wooden planks echoed through the empty studio like a gunshot. Jake had struggled back to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. Emma could see him reconsidering his commitment to this confrontation as he looked between his fallen friend and Tyler's increasingly desperate expression. "Tyler, maybe we should just shut up," Tyler snapped, his composure finally cracking. Under the pressure of having his carefully constructed image of dominance shattered by a girl half his size. "She got lucky, that's all. 3 against 1. There's no way she can." His words were cut off as Emma moved forward with the explosive speed of a trained fighter, closing the distance between them before he could react. Her front kick caught him in the midsection with enough force to double him over, and her follow-up knee strike would have connected with his face if she hadn't pulled it at the last second. Tyler collapsed to his hands and knees, struggling to breathe as Emma stepped back to assess the situation. Connor was still curled up on the floor, holding his stomach and making small whimpering sounds. Jake stood frozen near the door, clearly torn between loyalty to his friends and self-preservation. Emma moved to the center of the room, positioning herself where she could see all 3 of them while maintaining easy access to the exit. Her heart was pounding from the physical exertion, but her mind remained crystal clear. This was the moment that would define everything that came next. "This ends now," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that came from knowing she could back up her words with action. You leave me alone, you leave my friends alone, and we pretend this never happened. Tyler slowly pushed himself back up to a sitting position, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. Emma could see him struggling with the reality of what had just occurred, his worldview cracking under the weight of his first real defeat. You think this is over? He wheezed, still fighting to catch his breath. You have no idea what you've started. Nobody humiliates Tyler Morrison and gets away with it. Emma felt a chill of recognition at his words. This wasn't the response of someone who had learned a lesson from facing consequences for his actions. This was the reaction of a predator who had been temporarily frustrated, but was already planning his next move. I didn't start anything, she replied carefully. You cornered me in an empty room and made your intentions clear. I defended myself. If you choose to escalate this situation further, the consequences will be entirely on you. Jake finally found his voice, though it came out shaky and uncertain. Tyler, maybe she's right. Maybe we should just... I said shut up. Tyler's shout echoed through the studio, his loss of control becoming more evident with each passing second. Do you have any idea what this means? If word gets out that we were beaten up by some nobody transfer student, we're finished. Our reputation, our status, everything we've worked for. Emma realized with growing concern that Tyler's primary worry wasn't about the moral implications of what he had attempted to do to her. He was focused entirely on how this incident might damage his social standing and carefully cultivated image. This was someone who saw other people as objects to be manipulated rather than human beings deserving of basic respect. Connor had managed to struggle back to his feet, though he was still moving gingerly and avoiding direct eye contact with Emma. The confident swagger that had characterized his earlier behavior had been completely replaced by wary fear. What do you want us to do? Connor asked quietly, directing his question to Tyler rather than to Emma. Tyler pushed himself upright, using the wall for support as he fought to regain his composure. Emma could see him thinking frantically, trying to find a way to salvage his pride while avoiding another demonstration of her superior fighting skills. This isn't over, he said finally, his voice low but filled with venom. You might have caught us off guard this time, but next time will be different. Next time we'll be ready for you. Emma felt her training take over as she recognized the implicit threat in his words. In tournament competition, she had learned to read her opponent's intentions through their body language and verbal cues. Tyler was already planning his next move, and it would likely involve bringing additional resources to bear. There doesn't have to be a next time, she said calmly. You can choose to let this end here. Tyler's laugh was harsh and bitter. Let it end? You just destroyed everything we've built here. Our reputation, our standing with the team, our credibility with the girls in this school. You think we can just walk away from that? Emma began to understand the full scope of what she was dealing with. Tyler's identity was so completely wrapped up in his image as an untouchable alpha male that any threat to that status was existential in nature. He would likely view her very existence at Riverside Valley as an ongoing challenge that needed to be eliminated. Your reputation was built on intimidating people who couldn't fight back, she replied, her voice hardening slightly. Maybe it's time you learn to build something based on actual merit instead of fear. Jake shifted uncomfortably near the door, clearly wanting to escape this increasingly tense conversation. Emma could see him glancing between Tyler and the exit, calculating whether he could slip away without triggering another explosion from his volatile friend. Tyler pushed himself away from the wall, testing his balance as he prepared to leave. His face had settled into a mask of cold determination that was somehow more frightening than his earlier rage. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, he said quietly. This school, this town, it all works according to certain rules that have been in place for generations. You can't just show up and think you can change everything overnight. Emma maintained her ready stance as the three young men slowly moved toward the door. She had no intention of pursuing them or escalating the conflict further, but she also wasn't going to let her guard down until they were completely gone. "Maybe it's time for some new rules," she said evenly. Tyler paused at the threshold, turning back to look at her with an expression that combined grudging respect with obvious resentment. "We'll see about that, California. We'll definitely see about that." The three of them left without another word, though Emma could hear their voices echoing down the hallway as they argued among themselves about what had just happened. She remained motionless in the center of the studio for several long minutes, listening carefully to ensure they weren't planning an immediate return. When she was satisfied that they were truly gone, Emma finally allowed herself to relax. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation began to fade, leaving her feeling simultaneously exhilarated and deeply concerned about what would come next. She gathered her backpack and moved toward the door, pausing to examine the damaged mirror where Connor had impacted the wall. The spider web pattern of cracks seemed like a metaphor for what had just happened to the carefully constructed social order at Riverside Valley High School. Emma made her way through the empty hallways toward the parking lot, her mind racing with the implications of what had just occurred. She had successfully defended herself against three larger opponents, but in doing so, she had declared war against the most powerful students in the school. Tyler's parting words made it clear that he viewed this as the beginning of a larger conflict rather than its resolution. As she walked to her car, Emma found herself thinking about her sensei back in San Diego, Master Chun, who had always emphasized that true martial arts mastery involved knowing when not to fight as much as knowing how to win. She wondered what he would think about her decision to use physical force against Tyler and his friends. On one hand, she had clearly been defending herself against attackers who had cornered her with obvious criminal intent. The law would likely support her actions, and any reasonable person would agree that she had the right to protect herself from assault. On the other hand, Master Chun had always taught that the highest level of martial arts involved avoiding conflict entirely, finding ways to diffuse dangerous situations before they escalated to violence. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that someone with more experience might have found a way to escape the studio without having to fight at all. She reached her car and sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, trying to process the emotional weight of what had just happened. This was the first time she had ever used her martial arts training against someone outside of a controlled tournament environment, and the experience was both empowering and troubling. Emma started the engine and began the drive home, her mind already turning to practical considerations about what would happen next. Tyler's threats had been specific and credible, suggesting that this incident would not remain a secret for long. She needed to decide whether to tell her parents about what had happened, and she needed to consider whether she should report the attempted assault to school authorities. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that going to the administration would be a mistake. Based on what Sophia and Ms. Kim had told her about the Morrison family's influence over the school, any complaint she filed would likely be dismissed or turned against her. Tyler's father's position on the school board and the family's financial contributions to the athletic program created a conflict of interest that would make objective justice nearly impossible. Emma pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for a few more minutes, watching the sun set behind the Colorado mountains. The peaceful beauty of her new surroundings seemed at odds with the violence and corruption she had encountered at school, creating a cognitive dissonance that was difficult to reconcile. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Sophia. "Hey, how was your first day? Want to grab coffee tomorrow morning before school?" Emma stared at the message for a long time before responding. Sophia had been nothing but kind and welcoming, offering friendship and guidance when Emma needed it most. But getting close to people at Riverside Valley now meant potentially putting them in danger, especially if Tyler decided to expand his campaign of intimidation beyond Emma herself. She finally typed back. First day was interesting. Coffee sounds. Great, let's meet at 7:30. As Emma walked toward her house, she made a mental decision to keep the details of what had happened in the dance studio to herself, at least for now. She needed time to think through her options and develop a strategy for dealing with Tyler's inevitable retaliation. Her parents were in the kitchen when she entered, her father reading through work emails on his laptop while her mother prepared dinner. They looked up expectantly as she dropped her backpack by the door. "How was the new school, Mia?" her mother asked, using the affectionate Spanish term that always made Emma feel grounded and loved. "It was fine," Emma replied, forcing a smile that she hoped looked genuine. "Met some nice people. Teachers seemed decent. Pretty typical first day stuff." Her father glanced up from his computer. "Any trouble with the adjustment?" "I know starting over can be challenging, especially in a small town where everyone knows everyone." Emma felt a pang of guilt at deceiving her parents, but she also knew that involving them at this point would only create additional complications. Her father worked for a large corporation with offices throughout the region, and any scandal involving his daughter could potentially impact his career. "No trouble at all," she said carefully. "Just the usual new student stuff. I think I'll fit in fine once I get used to the routine." Her mother smiled and returned to her cooking, apparently satisfied with Emma's response. Her father nodded and went back to his emails, clearly trusting that his daughter would tell them if there were any serious problems. Emma excused herself and went upstairs to her room, closing the door behind her and finally allowing herself to fully process what had happened. She sat on her bed and closed her eyes, running through the events in the dance studio with the analytical mindset that Master Chun had taught her to apply to tournament matches. From a purely technical standpoint, her performance had been nearly flawless. She had successfully defended against multiple attackers without sustaining any significant injuries, and she had done so while maintaining enough control to avoid seriously harming her opponents. Tyler and his friends would be sore and bruised, but none of them had required medical attention. From a strategic standpoint, however, the situation was much more complex. Emma had won the immediate battle, but potentially set herself up for a much larger war. Tyler's reaction made it clear that he viewed her as an existential threat to his status and power structure, which meant he would likely marshal all available resources to neutralize that threat. Emma spent the evening researching Riverside Valley High School's disciplinary policies and procedures, trying to understand what options might be available to her if Tyler escalated their conflict. What she found was discouraging, but not surprising. The school's handbook was filled with noble-sounding language about zero tolerance for harassment and violence, but the practical implementation of these policies seemed to depend heavily on administrative discretion. She also spent time researching the Morrison family's business interests and community connections, trying to understand the full scope of their influence. What she discovered was sobering. Tyler's father didn't just own a car dealership. He was part of a network of interconnected businesses and political relationships that extended throughout the county. As Emma prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about the abandoned dance studio where everything had changed. The room had probably once been filled with students learning ballet or jazz dance, pursuing artistic expression in a space designed for creativity and growth. Instead, it had become the site of an attempted assault and the beginning of what promised to be a protracted conflict. She fell asleep that night with her phone on the nightstand, half expecting to receive threatening messages or discover that videos of the confrontation had somehow surfaced on social media. But the night passed quietly, leaving Emma to wonder whether Tyler was planning his next move or simply trying to pretend that the humiliating defeat had never happened. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost covering her car windshield and her breath visible in the mountain air. Emma arrived at the coffee shop 20 minutes early, wanting to scope out the location and ensure that she wasn't walking into another ambush. Sophia arrived precisely on time, carrying a messenger bag covered with patches from various social justice organizations and environmental groups. Her smile was as warm as it had been the previous day, though Emma thought she detected a hint of curiosity in her expression. "You look like you didn't sleep much," Sophia observed as they ordered their drinks. "Everything okay?" Emma hesitated, wondering how much to reveal about what had happened after school. Sophia had been honest about the power dynamics at Riverside Valley, and she deserved to know that the situation had already escalated beyond mere social intimidation. "Tyler Morrison and his friends cornered me yesterday afternoon," Emma said quietly, watching Sophia's expression carefully. "They made their intentions pretty clear, but I managed to convince them to leave me alone." Sophia's eyes widened with concern and anger. "Are you serious? Where did this happen? Did you report it?" Emma gave her an edited version of the events. "In the dance studio," leaving out the specific details of the fight while emphasizing Tyler's threats and his apparent determination to view her as an ongoing problem. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Sophia said, her voice tight with frustration. "They always start with intimidation, and when that doesn't work, they escalate. Emma, you need to be really careful. Tyler doesn't handle rejection well, and he's got the resources to make your life miserable." Emma sipped her coffee, appreciating both the warmth and the caffeine as she considered her next words. "Sophia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. If I fight back against Tyler and his friends, really fight back, what kind of support can I expect from other students?" Sophia was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through the implications of the question. "That depends on what you mean by fighting back. If you're talking about filing complaints through official channels, you'll probably be on your own. Most students have learned that challenging the athletic department is a losing proposition. And if I'm talking about something more direct?" Sophia's eyebrows rose slightly. "More direct how?" Emma chose her words carefully. "Let's say, hypothetically, that Tyler and his friends found themselves facing consequences for their behavior. That didn't depend on administrative approval or parental influence. How would the student body react to that?" Sophia leaned back in her chair, studying Emma with new interest. "There are a lot of students who would love to see Tyler taken down a few pegs. He's hurt a lot of people over the years, and most of us have just had to swallow it because there was no other choice. But would they actually support someone who stood up to him? Support how? Publicly? That's a lot more complicated. People are afraid, Emma. Tyler and his friends have long memories, and they're vindictive. Standing up to them openly is basically social suicide for most students." Emma nodded, having expected that response. The power dynamics that protected Tyler also isolated potential allies, creating a climate of fear that served to perpetuate the cycle of abuse. What about the teachers? Are there others besides Ms. Kim who might be willing to help? Sophia considered this question carefully. A few, maybe. Coach Chun in the wrestling program is pretty straightforward, and Ms. Rodriguez in the counseling office has always been supportive when students come to her with problems. But they're all constrained by the same political realities. Emma filed away these names for future reference. Building a network of adult allies would be crucial if her conflict with Tyler continued to escalate. They finished their coffee and walked towards school together, with Sophia continuing to share insights about the social dynamics that governed Riverside Valley High School. Emma listened carefully, building a mental map of potential allies and enemies as she prepared for what promised to be a very different kind of second day. As they approached the main entrance, Emma noticed several groups of students engaged in animated conversations that seemed to stop abruptly when they spotted her. Word of yesterday's confrontation had apparently spread overnight, though she couldn't tell from the brief glances whether the reaction was positive or negative. "Looks like you're already famous," Sophia observed quietly. "The rumor mill works fast around here." Emma felt her stomach tighten as she realized that her hope of keeping the incident quiet had been naive. In a school this size, Any unusual event would spread rapidly through social networks, gaining embellishments and distortions with each retelling. As they entered the building, Emma caught sight of Tyler standing near his locker with Jake and Connor. All three of them looked bruised and sullen, but Tyler's eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her skin crawl. His message was clear. This was far from over. Emma straightened her shoulders and walked toward her first class, ready to face whatever consequences her decision to fight back had created. The quiet new girl from California was gone forever, replaced by someone who had chosen to stand and fight rather than submit to intimidation. The real test of her resolve was just beginning. Emma's second day at Riverside Valley High School began with whispers following her through the corridors like shadows. Students who had completely ignored her existence 24 hours earlier now tracked her movements with a mixture of curiosity, fear, and something that might have been respect. The change in atmosphere was palpable, electric with the kind of tension that comes when established power structures begin to crack. She made it through her first 2 classes without incident, though she noticed Tyler was absent from the calculus course they supposedly shared. His empty desk seemed to mock her with its significance, a reminder that yesterday's confrontation had consequences rippling outward in ways she couldn't yet predict. During third period chemistry, Sophia leaned over their shared lab table with barely contained excitement. "You need to hear what people are saying," she whispered, pretending to study their assignment on molecular bonding. "Half the school thinks you're some kind of secret ninja, and the other half thinks Tyler made the whole thing up to cover for getting his ass kicked by a girl." Emma carefully measured sodium hydroxide into their beaker, maintaining the appearance of academic focus while her mind processed this information. What exactly are they saying happened? The stories are all over the place. Some people heard that you put all 3 of them in the hospital. Others think Tyler started a fight with you and you somehow turned it around on him. The most popular version is that you're actually an undercover martial arts instructor who came here specifically to take down the football team. Despite the gravity of her situation, Emma almost smiled at the absurdity of the rumors. And what do you think happened? Sophia's expression grew serious as she lowered her voice even further. "I think Tyler Morrison finally picked on someone who could fight back, and he's about to discover that his daddy's money can't fix everything." Before Emma could respond, their conversation was interrupted by the sharp crack of the classroom door slamming open. Connor Hayes stood in the doorway, his face still showing purple bruises around his left eye. His appearance sent a ripple of nervous energy through the room as students instinctively shifted away from potential conflict. "Ms. Rodriguez," he called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent classroom. "Principal Thompson wants to see you in her office. Right now." Emma felt her stomach drop even as her training kept her expression neutral. She had expected some form of administrative response, but the public nature of Connor's summons suggested that Tyler had decided to escalate their conflict through official channels. "I'll come with you," Sophia said immediately, starting to gather her books. "Just Ms. Rodriguez," Connor replied with obvious satisfaction. "This is a private matter." Emma packed her materials slowly, using the time to center herself mentally. She had prepared for this possibility during her sleepless night, running through various scenarios and potential responses. The key would be maintaining her composure, regardless of what accusations Tyler might have made. As she followed Connor through the hallways, Emma noticed that their procession was drawing significant attention. Students emerged from classrooms to watch, creating an impromptu audience for what everyone clearly recognized as a significant moment in the ongoing drama. Connor led her through the main administrative area to Principal Thompson's office, a spacious room dominated by mahogany furniture and photographs celebrating decades of athletic achievements. Tyler sat in one of the leather chairs facing the principal's desk, his posture carefully arranged to project wounded victimhood, despite the obvious bruising around his ribs. Principal Thompson was a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of professional demeanor that came from years of navigating small-town politics. She looked up as Emma entered, her expression revealing nothing about her intentions or sympathies. "Ms. Rodriguez, please have a seat. We need to discuss a very serious allegation that's been brought to my attention." Emma settled into the remaining chair, maintaining eye contact with Principal Thompson while keeping Tyler in her peripheral vision. Years of tournament competition had taught her to read her opponent's strategies through their body language and positioning. "Tyler has reported that you attacked him and 2 other students yesterday afternoon without provocation," Principal Thompson continued, consulting a typed report that presumably contained Tyler's version of events. "He claims that you used some form of martial arts training to assault 3 young men who were simply trying to welcome you to our school." Emma felt a surge of anger at the brazen distortion of facts, but her training kept her voice steady and respectful. "I'd like to hear the specific allegations before I respond, if that's acceptable." Principal Thompson nodded approvingly, apparently interpreting Emma's request as evidence of reasonableness rather than tactical thinking. "According to Tyler's statement, he and his friends approached you in the unused dance studio to introduce themselves and offer guidance about fitting into our school community. He states that you became aggressive and violent without warning, using what he describes as dangerous fighting techniques to injure all 3 young men." Tyler shifted in his chair, wincing theatrically as though his injuries were causing him significant pain. Emma noticed that he had positioned himself to display the bruising on his face and arms, while concealing any evidence that might contradict his victim narrative. "That's an interesting interpretation of events," Emma said carefully. "May I ask, what evidence supports this version of what happened?" Principal Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly at Emma's calm response. "Are you denying that you physically assaulted these students?" "I'm asking what evidence exists beyond Tyler's testimony. Were there witnesses to this alleged unprovoked attack? Security camera footage? Medical reports documenting these supposed injuries?" Tyler's jaw tightened at Emma's methodical approach, clearly having expected a more emotional or defensive response. "I don't need to prove anything," he said, his voice carrying an edge of frustration. 3 students were injured by one person who admits to having martial arts training. That's assault, and it should be treated as such. Emma turned to face Tyler directly, letting her calm confidence contrast with his growing agitation. "I notice you're not denying that you cornered me in an isolated room. Would you like to explain to Principal Thompson what you and your friends were actually doing in that dance studio?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and Emma watched Principal Thompson's expression carefully for any sign of recognition. She suspected that someone in the administrator's position would have heard enough rumors about Tyler's behavior to understand the implication behind Emma's words. "We were trying to help her adjust to the school," Tyler said quickly, but his voice lacked the conviction of his earlier statements. "New students sometimes need guidance about how things work here. What kind of guidance exactly?" Emma pressed, maintaining her respectful tone while clearly establishing that she wasn't intimidated by either Tyler's accusations or the administrative setting. Principal Thompson held up a hand to halt the exchange, her expression suggesting that she was beginning to recognize the complexity of the situation. "Let me be very clear about something, Ms. Rodriguez. Riverside Valley High School has a zero-tolerance policy regarding violence of any kind. If you used physical force against other students, regardless of the circumstances, there will be serious consequences." Emma nodded slowly, processing both the words and the subtext of Principal Thompson's statement. The emphasis on regardless of circumstances suggested that the administration was either unwilling or unable to address the context that had led to the confrontation. "I understand the school's policy," Emma replied. "I also understand that students have a right to defend themselves when they're cornered and threatened by multiple attackers." Tyler leaned forward aggressively, Threatened? We never threatened her. We were just trying to what? Emma interrupted, her voice remaining calm but carrying a note of steel that made Tyler pause. To welcome me by blocking the only exit from the room. To help me adjust by surrounding me and making comments about how I needed to learn my place. Principal Thompson was taking notes now, her pen moving rapidly across a legal pad as she documented the competing narratives. Emma could see her weighing political considerations against administrative responsibilities, calculating the potential fallout from various courses of action. These are serious allegations on both sides, Principal Thompson said finally. Tyler, you're claiming that Emma attacked you without provocation. Emma, you're suggesting that you were defending yourself against some form of intimidation or threat. Without independent witnesses or physical evidence, this becomes a matter of competing testimonies. Emma recognized the diplomatic language of someone preparing to split the difference rather than pursue actual justice. Principal Thompson, may I ask whether the school has had previous reports about Tyler Morrison and his friends engaging in intimidating behavior toward female students? The question landed like a physical blow, causing Tyler to straighten in his chair while Principal Thompson's expression grew carefully neutral. Emma could sense that she had touched on something significant, a pattern of behavior that the administration preferred not to acknowledge publicly. I can't discuss other students' disciplinary records, Principal Thompson said carefully. But I will say that we take all reports of harassment very seriously. Then you'll understand why I'm requesting a thorough investigation of this incident. Emma replied, including interviews with other students who might have information about the context of what happened yesterday. Tyler's face was flushing red now, his careful victim act beginning to crumble under the pressure of Emma's methodical approach. This is ridiculous. I'm the one who got her here. I'm the one with bruises and injuries. Why is she being allowed to turn this around on me? Emma turned to look at Tyler with the kind of calm assessment that she used when facing opponents in tournament competition. You're right that you were injured, but you seem to be having trouble explaining how that happened if you were simply offering friendly guidance to a new student. Principal Thompson set down her pen and leaned back in her chair, clearly recognizing that this situation was more complex than Tyler's initial report had suggested. I think we need to take a step back here. Tyler, I want you to give me a detailed account of exactly what was said and done in that dance studio, from the moment you arrived until the moment you left. Tyler glanced between Emma and Principal Thompson, clearly calculating his options. Emma could see him struggling with the realization that his usual strategy of relying on his family's influence and community status wasn't working in this context. We went to the studio because we heard someone in there, Tyler said slowly, his story already beginning to shift. We thought it might be someone vandalizing school property, so we went to check it out. When we found Emma doing some kind of martial arts routine, we tried to introduce ourselves and maybe learn something about her background. Emma waited for him to continue, letting his revised narrative hang in the air while Principal Thompson scribbled more notes. Then what happened? Principal Thompson prompted. She just went crazy, Tyler said, his voice rising slightly. Started attacking us without any warning. Connor got thrown into the mirror, Jake got hit in the face, and I got kicked in the stomach. We were just defending ourselves. Emma felt a moment of genuine amazement at Tyler's ability to distort reality so completely. His revised story eliminated any mention of the intimidating behavior, the blocked exit, or the implicit threats that had preceded the physical confrontation. That's interesting, Emma said quietly. If you were simply defending yourselves against an unprovoked attack, why didn't you immediately report the incident? Why wait until today to bring this to Principal Thompson's attention? Tyler's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound, clearly caught off guard by the logical inconsistency in his story. Emma pressed her advantage with the relentless politeness of someone who knew she was winning. Also, if I had really attacked 3 innocent students without provocation, wouldn't the logical response be to call the police rather than just filing a school disciplinary complaint? Principal Thompson looked up from her notes with growing interest. Those are valid questions, Tyler. Can you explain the delay in reporting this alleged assault? Tyler was floundering now, his carefully constructed narrative beginning to collapse. Under scrutiny. We thought maybe we could handle it ourselves. You know, give her a chance to apologize and make things right without involving the administration. So you waited a full day to report this assault because you wanted to give me an opportunity to apologize? Emma's tone remained respectful, but the absurdity of Tyler's explanation was becoming impossible to ignore. This is insane. Tyler exploded, finally losing the composure he had been struggling to maintain. Why is everyone acting like I'm the one who did something wrong here? I'm the victim. She's the one with the dangerous training. She's the one who hurt people. Emma watched Tyler's outburst with clinical interest, recognizing the behavior of someone whose entitled worldview was being challenged for perhaps the first time. His inability to maintain his story under basic questioning revealed both his inexperience with accountability and his assumption that his word would be accepted without verification. Principal Thompson was observing Tyler's breakdown with obvious concern, clearly reassessing her initial assumptions about the incident. Tyler, I need you to calm down. Getting emotional isn't going to help us resolve this situation. I am calm. Tyler shouted, proving the opposite. I just want something done about this crazy girl who thinks she can attack people and get away with it. Emma remained motionless in her chair, letting Tyler's loss of control speak for itself. Years of meditation and mental discipline had taught her the power of maintaining inner peace while others around her descended into chaos. Tyler, Principal Thompson said firmly, I think you need to take a few minutes to collect yourself. Emma, I'd like to speak with you privately. Tyler looked stunned at being dismissed, clearly having expected that his family's influence would guarantee a favorable outcome. You can't be serious. You're going to take her word over mine? I'm going to investigate this matter thoroughly and fairly, Principal Thompson replied with the tone of someone whose patience was wearing thin. That includes getting all perspectives and examining all available evidence. After Tyler left the office, still muttering about unfair treatment in family connections, Principal Thompson turned her full attention to Emma. The atmosphere in the room shifted noticeably, becoming less formal and more genuinely investigative. Ms. Rodriguez, I want you to know that your approach to this meeting has been impressive. You've remained calm, asked intelligent questions, and presented your perspective without resorting to emotional manipulation. That's not always the case. In these situations, Emma inclined her head respectfully. Thank you, Principal Thompson. I believe that the truth is usually found through careful examination of facts rather than passionate arguments. Tell me, in your own words, exactly what happened in that dance studio yesterday. Emma took a deep breath and provided a detailed account of the events, from her discovery of the unused room through the final confrontation and Tyler's threats. She was careful to include the context of the lunchtime encounter and the implicit intimidation that had preceded the physical altercation. Principal Thompson listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but generally allowing Emma to tell her story completely. When Emma finished, the principal sat quietly for several minutes, clearly processing the information. You mentioned that you have martial arts training. What's your background in that area? I've been studying Kyokushin Karate since I was 7 years old. I currently hold a 3rd-degree black belt, and I've competed in regional and state tournaments. That's a significant level of training. Were you aware that students with your level of skill might be considered to have enhanced responsibility regarding the use of physical force? Emma had expected this question and had prepared her response carefully. My sensei always taught us that martial arts training comes with the responsibility to avoid violence whenever possible. I only used physical force after Tyler and his friends made it clear that they weren't going to allow me to leave the room peacefully. Principal Thompson made more notes, her expression remaining professionally neutral, but somehow less hostile than it had been during Tyler's presence. Emma, I'm going to be frank with you about something. This isn't the first time Tyler Morrison and his friends have been the subject of complaints regarding their treatment of female students. However, previous allegations have been difficult to substantiate, and the Morrison family's position in this community creates certain complications. Emma felt a surge of validation mixed with frustration. Are you saying that Tyler has done this to other girls? I'm saying that there have been reports, but reports aren't the same as proof. What makes your situation different is that you were apparently able to defend yourself effectively, which has created physical evidence and forced Tyler to make specific claims that can be examined and challenged. Emma began to understand the larger implications of what Principal Thompson was suggesting. Her successful defense against Tyler hadn't just protected her from assault. It had potentially created an opportunity to address a pattern of predatory behavior that had previously been protected by wealth and influence. What happens next? Emma asked. I'm going to conduct a full investigation, which will include interviews with other students who might have relevant information. I'm also going to review Tyler's disciplinary history and consult with the district office about appropriate procedures for cases involving allegations of sexual harassment. Emma felt a mixture of hope and apprehension at this development. On one hand, it appeared that Principal Thompson was taking the situation seriously and might actually pursue justice rather than political expediency. On the other hand, Emma knew that challenging the Morrison family's influence would require significant courage from someone whose job security depended on community support. Principal Thompson, I appreciate your willingness to investigate this thoroughly. I want you to know that I never intended to create a controversy. I just wanted to defend myself and be left alone to focus on my education. I understand that, Emma, but sometimes defending yourself has broader implications than you might expect. Your willingness to stand up to Tyler Morrison might have opened a door that's been closed for too long. As Emma left Principal Thompson's office, she felt the weight of unintended responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had come to Colorado hoping for a fresh start and a chance to focus on academics without the social complications that had sometimes distracted her in California. Instead, she found herself at the center of a conflict that could potentially reshape the power dynamics of an entire school community. The hallways buzzed with nervous energy as students tried to read the implications of her extended meeting with the principal. Emma noticed that some of Tyler's usual hangers-on were conspicuously absent from their normal positions near the trophy cases, while other students who had never acknowledged her existence were now watching her with obvious interest. Sophia appeared at her locker during the lunch period, practically vibrating with curiosity and concern. Everyone's talking about you getting called to Thompson's office. Tyler came out looking like he'd been hit by a truck, and you look different. What happened in there? Emma glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard, then provided Sophia with a summary of the meeting. As she described Tyler's failed attempt to control the narrative and Principal Thompson's promise of a thorough investigation, she watched Sophia's expression shift from concern to amazement. You actually challenged Tyler Morrison in the principal's office and won? Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper, but her excitement was unmistakable. Emma, do you realize what this means? For the first time since I've been at this school, someone has forced the administration to actually question Tyler's version of events. Emma felt the weight of expectation in Sophia's words, the hope that her resistance might create opportunities for others who had been silenced by fear or institutional indifference. It was both inspiring and terrifying to realize that her personal conflict had become symbolic of larger issues. Sophia, I need you to understand something. This isn't over. Tyler's not going to accept what happened in that office, and he's Certainly not going to accept being investigated for a pattern of harassment. He's going to escalate this situation, probably in ways that I can't predict. Sophia nodded seriously. I know, but Emma, you've already changed something fundamental here. Tyler's aura of invincibility has been cracked, and people are starting to notice. That's worth fighting for. As Emma made her way to her afternoon classes, she found herself thinking about the abandoned dance studio where everything had begun. The room had been designed for artistic expression, for students to explore creativity and develop their talents in a supportive environment. Instead, it had become the site of attempted assault and the beginning of a conflict that now threatened to expose years of institutional corruption. She wondered if the irony was lost on Tyler Morrison, that his decision to corner her in a space meant for beauty and growth had ultimately led to the first serious challenge to his protected status. Perhaps there was justice in that symmetry, a suggestion that spaces dedicated to human development couldn't be permanently corrupted by those who sought to exploit and control others. Emma's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This isn't over. You have no idea what you've started. She stared at the message for a long moment, recognizing Tyler's attempt to maintain his campaign of intimidation despite the morning's setbacks. But instead of fear, Emma felt a familiar calm settling over her mind, the same centered focus that had carried her through countless tournament competitions. Tyler Morrison was about to discover that threatening someone with legitimate martial arts training was very different from intimidating helpless victims. Emma Rodriguez had spent years learning to face opponents who were bigger, stronger, and more aggressive than herself. She was ready for whatever came next. The real test was just beginning, and Emma intended to meet it with the same disciplined courage that had defined her approach to martial arts since childhood. Tyler had chosen this war, but Emma was going to finish it. The investigation that Principal Thompson promised moved with surprising speed and thoroughness. Within 48 hours, Emma found herself witnessing something she had never expected to see at Riverside Valley High School: actual accountability for the privileged elite. The breakthrough came when David Park, the quiet photographer who sat with Sophia's group at lunch, approached Emma between classes with a manila envelope clutched tightly in his hands. His usually calm demeanor showed signs of nervous excitement as he glanced around to ensure they weren't being observed. "Emma, I need to show you something," he said quietly, guiding her toward an empty classroom. "But first, I need you to promise me that you'll protect my identity if this gets out." Emma studied his face, recognizing the fear of someone about to take a significant risk. "David, what is this about?" He opened the envelope and withdrew a series of photographs that made Emma's blood run cold. The images showed Tyler, Jake, and Connor in various locations around the school, engaged in behavior that was clearly predatory. One photo captured Tyler cornering a younger girl near the gym lockers. Another showed Connor grabbing a female student's arm in an aggressive manner. The most damning image depicted Jake blocking the girl's path while Tyler leaned in uncomfortably close, his body language unmistakably threatening. "I've been documenting this for months," David explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "I always carry my camera, and I started noticing patterns in their behavior. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but then I realized that they were systematically targeting girls who couldn't fight back." Emma studied the photographs with growing anger and determination. "Why didn't you report this before?" David's laugh was bitter. "Report it to who? Principal Thompson? She's been covering for these guys since they started high school. The Morrison family essentially owns this place through their donations, and everyone knows it. But you kept taking pictures anyway. I kept hoping that someday someone would be in a position to actually do something with the evidence. When I heard about what happened in the dance studio, I realized that time might finally have come." Emma felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders again. David had been building a case against Tyler and his friends for months, waiting for someone with the courage and capability to challenge their protected status. Her successful defense in the dance studio had apparently convinced him that she might be that person. "David, these photographs are incredible evidence. But why are you giving them to me instead of taking them to Principal Thompson yourself?" "Because I'm a nobody in this school's social hierarchy. If I walk into Thompson's office with these pictures, they'll disappear, and I'll probably find myself facing charges for stalking or invasion of privacy. But you've already forced them to take you seriously. You have credibility that I don't." Emma understood the logic behind David's strategy, even as she felt overwhelmed by the implications. These photographs represented years of predatory behavior that had been hidden behind athletic achievement and family influence. They were also evidence of systematic institutional failure to protect vulnerable students. "There's something else," David continued, pulling out a small digital recorder. "I managed to capture audio of Tyler and his friends, planning what they were going to do to you before they cornered you in the dance studio. They were discussing strategies for intimidating you into compliance, and their language was explicit." Emma listened to several minutes of recorded conversation that left no doubt about Tyler's intentions or his friends' willing participation in planned assault. The casual nature of their discussion suggested that this was routine behavior rather than an isolated incident. "David, this changes everything. With this evidence, there's no way the administration can ignore what's been happening. That's what I'm hoping. But Emma, you need to understand the risks involved in using this material. The Morrison family has lawyers, political connections, and enough money to make life very difficult for anyone who threatens their son's reputation." Emma spent that evening studying David's photographs and listening repeatedly to the recorded conversations. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, painting a picture of systematic predatory behavior that had been allowed to continue unchecked for years. She also researched the legal implications of the recordings and photographs, wanting to ensure that David hadn't inadvertently compromised their value as evidence through improper collection methods. What she discovered was encouraging. Colorado's one-party consent law meant that David's recordings were legally admissible, and his photographs had been taken in public spaces where there was no expectation of privacy. The next morning, Emma requested another meeting with Principal Thompson, this time bringing David along as a witness and bringing copies of all the evidence he had collected. The principal's expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed the photographs and listened to excerpts from the recorded conversations. "This is extremely serious," Principal Thompson said finally, setting down the last photograph with obvious distaste. "If this evidence is authentic, it suggests a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond the incident you reported earlier this week." Emma leaned forward in her chair. "Principal Thompson, these materials prove that Tyler Morrison and his friends have been systematically targeting female students for harassment and assault. The incident in the dance studio wasn't an isolated event. It was part of an ongoing campaign of predatory behavior." Principal Thompson was quiet for several long minutes, clearly wrestling with the implications of what she was seeing and hearing. Emma could sense the administrator calculating political risks against moral responsibilities, weighing the potential consequences of taking action against such influential families. "Ms. Rodriguez, Mr. Park, I want you to understand the gravity of what you're presenting to me. These allegations, if proven true, would result in serious criminal charges against 3 of our most prominent student athletes. The fallout would extend far beyond the school and into the wider community." David spoke up for the first time since entering the office. "Principal Thompson, with respect, the fallout has already been happening. It's just been concentrated on the victims instead of the perpetrators. These photographs show at least 7 different girls being harassed or intimidated. How many more incidents were documented?" Emma watched Principal Thompson's face carefully, looking for signs of her decision-making process. She could see The administrator struggling with the reality that ignoring this evidence would be impossible, while acting on it would trigger a community-wide crisis. "I need to contact the district office and potentially law enforcement," Principal Thompson said finally. "This level of evidence requires a response that goes beyond school disciplinary procedures." Emma felt a surge of hope mixed with apprehension. The involvement of higher authorities would make it much more difficult for the Morrison family to suppress the investigation, but it would also escalate the conflict to a level where the consequences for everyone involved would be severe. "What happens to David and me in the meantime?" Emma asked. "Tyler has already shown that he's willing to retaliate against people who challenge him." Principal Thompson's expression grew serious. "I'm going to recommend that all 3 boys be suspended immediately pending the outcome of the investigation. That should provide some protection for potential witnesses while ensuring that evidence isn't tampered with." The suspension of Tyler, Jake, and Connor sent shockwaves through Riverside Valley High School that reverberated far beyond the building's walls. By the end of the school day, news of the scandal had reached parents, community leaders, and local media outlets. Emma found herself at the center of a storm that was rapidly growing beyond anything she had anticipated. The first sign that the conflict was entering a new phase came in the form of a phone call to Emma's house that evening. Her father answered and spoke in tense, clipped sentences before hanging up with obvious frustration. "That was someone claiming to represent the Morrison family's legal team," he explained to Emma and her mother. "They wanted to discuss what they called a mutually beneficial resolution to some kind of misunderstanding involving you and their son." Emma felt her stomach tighten. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you about what's been happening at school." She provided her parents with a complete account of the events that had led to the current crisis, from the initial confrontation in the dance studio, through the evidence that David had collected and the investigation that was now underway. Her parents listened with growing alarm and anger as they realized the scope of what their daughter had been dealing with. "Why didn't you tell us about this sooner?" her mother asked, her voice tight with concern and frustration. "Because I thought I could handle it myself, and because I was afraid that involving you might make things worse for Dad's job." Emma's father shook his head firmly. "Mia, your safety is more important than any job. And if these boys have been doing what you describe, then they need to face consequences regardless of their family's influence." The conversation was interrupted by the doorbell, followed immediately by insistent knocking that suggested their visitors weren't planning to wait patiently. Emma's father looked through the window and cursed under his breath in Spanish. "There are 3 cars in our driveway, including one with Morrison Automotive logos on the side." Emma felt her martial arts training automatically kicking in as her body prepared for potential conflict. "Dad, don't let them in. Whatever they want to discuss can wait until tomorrow when we can have our own lawyer present." The knocking became more insistent, accompanied by voices demanding to speak with Emma and her family about resolving this misunderstanding before it gets out of hand. Emma's father ignored the demands, instead calling the local police to report harassment and potential trespassing. The arrival of a patrol car sent the unwelcome visitors away, but not before Tyler Morrison Sr. shouted threats about lawsuits and community consequences through the front door. Emma realized that her conflict with Tyler had now expanded to include a battle between families with very different resources and levels of influence. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Emma arrived at school to find Principal Thompson waiting for her with an expression that mixed relief and vindication. "The district investigation has uncovered additional evidence," Principal Thompson explained. "It turns out that David's documentation was just the tip of the iceberg. When investigators interviewed other students, they found a pattern of intimidation and assault that goes back nearly 3 years. Emma felt a mixture of validation and sadness as she learned about the scope of Tyler's predatory behavior. 6 different girls had come forward with detailed accounts of harassment, intimidation, and in 2 cases, sexual assault. The conspiracy of silence that had protected Tyler and his friends was finally breaking down under the weight of overwhelming evidence. What's going to happen to them? The criminal investigation is ongoing, but the school district has already made its decision. Tyler Morrison, Jake Sullivan, and Connor Hayes have been permanently expelled from Riverside Valley High School. Additionally, the district is reviewing the actions of staff members who may have failed to respond appropriately to previous complaints. Emma absorbed this information with complex emotions. On one hand, she felt satisfied that justice was finally being served and that future students would be protected from Tyler's predatory behavior. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that this outcome might have been achieved years earlier if the first victims had been taken seriously. The community reaction to the expulsions was swift and divided. Tyler's supporters, led by his father and the Booster Club, denounced the investigation as a witch hunt motivated by jealousy of the football team's success. They organized protests and letter-writing campaigns, demanding that the boys be reinstated and the false accusers be held accountable. However, the evidence was too overwhelming and the testimonies too credible for the protests to gain significant traction. Local newspaper coverage focused on the systematic nature of the abuse and the institutional failures that had allowed it to continue unchecked. Editorial writers called for broader reforms to prevent future incidents and ensure that athletic achievement never again became a shield for criminal behavior. Emma found herself reluctantly thrust into the role of a symbol for standing up to institutional corruption and refusing to be silenced by wealth and influence. Students who had never spoken to her before approached with stories of their own encounters with Tyler and his friends, thanking her for having the courage to fight back when others couldn't. Miss Kim, the history teacher who had first reached out to Emma, approached her after class one afternoon with tears in her eyes. "You did something that I should have done years ago," she said quietly. "I knew what Tyler was doing to these girls, but I convinced myself that I couldn't prove it, and that speaking up would only cost me my job. You showed us all what real courage looks like." Emma felt the weight of unintended heroism settling on her shoulders. She had never sought to become a crusader for justice or a symbol of resistance against corruption. She had simply wanted to defend herself and be left alone to focus on her education. The final resolution came 6 weeks after the initial confrontation in the dance studio. Tyler Morrison, Jake Sullivan, and Connor Hayes all pleaded guilty to multiple charges including assault, harassment, and conspiracy. Tyler received the harshest sentence due to his role as the ringleader, while Jake and Connor were treated as followers who had been influenced by his leadership. More importantly for the school community, the investigation led to comprehensive reforms in how harassment complaints were handled and documented. Principal Thompson, who had shown genuine commitment to uncovering the truth once presented with undeniable evidence, was retained but required to implement new protocols for protecting vulnerable students. The Morrison family's influence over school policies was permanently curtailed through new district guidelines that prevented individual donors from wielding disproportionate power over disciplinary decisions. The Booster Club was restructured to include community oversight and transparency requirements that made it much more difficult for wealthy families to purchase immunity for their children's misconduct. Emma's role in exposing the corruption earned her recognition from anti-bullying organizations and invitations to speak at other schools about the importance of standing up to institutional abuse. However, she declined most of these opportunities, preferring to focus on her academic goals and martial arts training. The abandoned dance studio where everything had begun was renovated and reopened, transformed into a meditation and conflict resolution center where students could learn peaceful approaches to handling disputes. Emma often visited the space during lunch periods, practicing her kata forms in the same room where she had first been forced to defend herself against Tyler's assault. David Park's photography skills earned him recognition from local journalism organizations, and his documentation of the harassment patterns became a case study in the power of citizen journalism to expose institutional corruption. He went on to win a full scholarship to study photojournalism at Colorado State University. Sofia Martinez became student body president the following year, running on a platform of transparency and accountability that resonated with voters who had witnessed the transformation that could result from challenging entrenched power structures. Her administration implemented peer mediation programs and anonymous reporting systems that made it much easier for students to seek help when facing harassment or intimidation. Emma's parents, initially concerned about the attention and controversy surrounding their daughter's actions, came to understand that her courage had not only protected her, but had created a safer environment for countless other students. Her father received a promotion at work, his company recognizing that his family's integrity and his daughter's moral courage reflected positively on his character and judgment. The football team, initially devastated by the loss of 3 key players, rallied under new leadership and went on to have their most successful season in school history. The team's improved chemistry and genuine camaraderie, no longer poisoned by Tyler's toxic influence, created a culture of mutual respect and shared achievement that inspired the entire school community. Tyler Morrison himself served his sentence and was required to attend counseling focused on understanding the impact of his actions on his victims. His father's business suffered significant losses as community members chose to take their automotive needs elsewhere, while the family's political influence evaporated as former allies distanced themselves from the scandal. In a letter delivered to Emma through their lawyers, Tyler expressed genuine remorse for his actions and acknowledged the pain he had caused to multiple victims over several years. While Emma never responded directly to the letter, she kept it as a reminder that even people who seemed irredeemably corrupted by privilege and power could potentially learn and grow from facing real consequences for their behavior. Emma Rodriguez completed her senior year at Riverside Valley High School with academic honors and acceptance to several prestigious universities. She chose to study criminal justice with a focus on institutional reform, inspired by her experience in exposing systematic abuse and corruption. On graduation day, as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, Emma reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her from a quiet new student, hoping to avoid attention, to someone who had fundamentally changed the culture of an entire school community. The abandoned dance studio had been transformed from a site of attempted assault into a symbol of resilience and positive change. Tyler Morrison and his friends had learned that wealth and influence couldn't protect them from the consequences of their actions when those actions were exposed to the light of truth and accountability. Most importantly, future students at Riverside Valley High School would attend classes in an environment where predatory behavior was no longer tolerated, where victims were believed and supported, and where the courage to stand up for what's right was celebrated rather than punished. Emma Rodriguez had come to Colorado hoping for a fresh start. Instead, she had become a catalyst for the kind of institutional transformation that creates lasting change and protects future generations from the abuse of power. Her legacy would live on in every student who felt safe to report harassment, every administrator who chose accountability over political convenience, and every community member who understood that true strength comes from protecting the vulnerable rather than enabling the powerful. The quiet girl with hidden martial arts skills had become something much more significant, a reminder that individual courage, supported by evidence and determination, could overcome even the most entrenched systems of corruption and abuse. Her story would be remembered long after the bruises faded and the controversy died down, serving as inspiration for others who face similar challenges and proof that justice, while sometimes delayed, could ultimately prevail. As Emma drove away from Riverside Valley High School for the final time, She carried with her the knowledge that she had used her skills not just to defend herself, but to defend an entire community against those who would exploit and harm others. It was, she reflected, exactly what her sensei had always taught her martial arts should accomplish: the protection of those who couldn't protect themselves, and the creation of a more just and peaceful world. 3 weeks after David Park handed over his explosive evidence, Emma Rodriguez found herself standing in the main hallway of Riverside Valley High School watching something she never thought she would see: Tyler Morrison cleaning out his locker. Under the supervision of a security guard, while students whispered and pointed from a safe distance. The criminal investigation had moved with unprecedented speed once the district attorney's office received David's photographs and audio recordings. What had begun as a school disciplinary matter had rapidly escalated into a multi-count felony case that made headlines throughout Colorado. The evidence was so overwhelming that even the Morrison family's expensive legal team had advised cooperation rather than resistance. Emma maintained her distance as Tyler stuffed his belongings into cardboard boxes, but she could see the dramatic change in his demeanor. Gone was the swagger and entitlement that had defined his presence at the school. In its place was a young man who seemed to have aged years in mere weeks, his shoulders hunched with the weight of consequences he had never imagined facing. Jake Sullivan and Connor Hayes had already completed their own humiliating departures, their athletic scholarships revoked and their college prospects destroyed by criminal convictions that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The 3 young men who had once ruled Riverside Valley High School through fear and intimidation were now cautionary tales about the ultimate powerlessness of privilege when confronted with irrefutable evidence of systematic abuse. Principal Thompson approached Emma as Tyler's convoy of shame finally departed the building. The administrator's expression mixed relief with obvious exhaustion from weeks of intensive investigation and community pressure. "I wanted to personally thank you for your courage in bringing this situation to light," Principal Thompson said quietly. The district investigation uncovered evidence of harassment incidents going back to Tyler's sophomore year. Without your willingness to stand up to him, who knows how many more victims there might have been. Emma nodded, though she couldn't shake the sadness that accompanied her satisfaction with the outcome. How many girls came forward in total? 11 different students provided testimony about incidents involving Tyler and his friends. The pattern was consistent and disturbing. They specifically targeted girls who were new to the school, socially isolated, or from families without significant community connections. The calculated nature of the predatory behavior made Emma's stomach tighten with anger. Tyler hadn't been an impulsive teenager making poor decisions. He had been a methodical predator who used his protected status to systematically abuse vulnerable victims. "What happens to the school now?" Emma asked. "I mean, how do you rebuild trust after something like this?" Principal Thompson's expression grew thoughtful. "The district has mandated comprehensive reforms to our harassment reporting procedures and student disciplinary processes. We're also implementing new training programs for staff and students about recognizing and responding to predatory behavior." Emma appreciated the institutional changes, but she wondered whether policy reforms would be sufficient to address the cultural problems that had allowed Tyler's behavior to continue unchecked for so long. The real test would come when the next privileged student decided to test whether wealth and athletic achievement could still purchase immunity from consequences. Ms. Kim found Emma at her locker later that afternoon, carrying a manila folder, thick with paperwork and wearing an expression of cautious optimism. "I wanted to show you something," Ms. Kim said, opening the folder to reveal a detailed proposal for a new student advocacy program. The district is funding a position for a full-time victim advocate who will work directly with students who report harassment or assault. They're also creating a peer counseling program and an anonymous reporting system. Emma studied the documents with growing interest. The proposed changes went far beyond superficial policy adjustments to address the fundamental power imbalances that had enabled Tyler's predatory behavior. "This looks comprehensive," Emma observed. "But how do we know these reforms won't just be ignored when the controversy dies down?" Miss Kim smiled. "Because the district is also implementing regular audits of our disciplinary procedures, and they're requiring annual reporting to the state education department about harassment incidents and responses. There will be ongoing oversight to ensure that these aren't just empty promises." Emma felt a surge of hope that her traumatic experience might actually result in lasting protection for future students. The systematic nature of the reform suggested that the district had learned important lessons about the dangers of allowing any group of students to operate above accountability. David Park approached their conversation with his ever-present camera and expression of nervous excitement. Since providing the evidence that had broken the case wide open, he had become something of a local celebrity, with journalism schools and news organizations reaching out about his documentation of institutional corruption. "Emma, I wanted to show you something before it goes public," David said, producing a memory card from his camera bag. "I've been working on a photo essay about the transformation happening at the school since Tyler's expulsion. The difference in atmosphere is remarkable." Emma looked at David's latest photographs with amazement. The images captured students moving through hallways with a freedom and confidence that had been notably absent during Tyler's reign of intimidation. Girls were laughing openly, participating in class discussions without fear, and occupying spaces that had previously been dominated by Tyler's crew. "You can literally see the change in body language," David explained. "Students are standing taller, making eye contact, engaging with each other in ways that weren't happening before. It's like the entire school has exhaled after holding its breath for years." Emma recognized the truth in David's observation. She had noticed the same transformation in her daily interactions with classmates. Students who had previously averted their eyes when passing Tyler's group in the hallways now moved with the easy confidence of people who weren't constantly calculating potential threats. Sofia Martinez joined their impromptu gathering, carrying a clipboard thick with petition signatures and wearing a campaign button that read, "Transparency and Accountability in Student Government." "Perfect timing," Sofia announced. "I just finished collecting signatures for the ballot initiative. That would give students a voice in disciplinary policy decisions. We've got over 400 signatures, which is more than enough to get it on the ballot for next month's student government elections." Emma was impressed by the speed with which Sofia had organized grassroots support for systemic reform. The petition represented something that would have been unthinkable during Tyler's era, students demanding a voice in the policies that governed their own safety and well-being. "What kind of authority would students have under this proposal?" Emma asked. "We're proposing a student review board that would participate in harassment investigations and provide input on disciplinary decisions," Sofia explained. "It wouldn't replace adult oversight, but it would ensure that student perspectives are included in processes that directly affect us." Emma nodded approvingly. The proposal struck a reasonable balance between student empowerment and administrative responsibility, creating accountability without undermining legitimate authority structures. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Coach Mike Chun, Ms. Kim's husband, who had been conspicuously absent from school during the most intense period of the investigation. Emma had wondered about his perspective on events that had destroyed 3 members of the athletic programs he helped oversee. "Ms. Rodriguez," Coach Chen said formally, extending his hand in greeting. "I wanted to personally apologize for not speaking up sooner about concerns I had regarding Tyler Morrison and his friends." Emma shook his hand while studying his expression for signs of sincerity. "What kind of concerns?" "I witnessed incidents in the locker room and weight facility that should have been reported to administration," Coach Chen admitted. "Inappropriate comments about female students, discussions of targeting specific girls for harassment, behavior that was clearly predatory." In nature. Emma felt a flash of anger at this admission of institutional failure. Why didn't you report what you witnessed? Coach Chen's expression grew pained. I convinced myself that boys' locker room talk wasn't the same as actual assault. I thought that Tyler would mature and outgrow his inappropriate behavior. I was wrong, and my failure to act allowed him to continue victimizing students. Emma appreciated the coach's honesty while feeling frustrated by the familiar pattern of adults failing to protect vulnerable students. What's different now? The athletics department is implementing new protocols for reporting and investigating inappropriate behavior by student athletes, Coach Chen explained. We're also requiring all coaches to complete training on recognizing signs of predatory behavior and understanding our legal obligations to report misconduct. Emma found some comfort in these institutional changes, though she couldn't help wondering whether they would have been implemented without the dramatic exposure that had resulted from her successful self-defense against Tyler's assault. As the group began to disperse, Emma found herself walking alone toward the parking lot, processing the complex emotions that accompanied witnessing justice finally being served. She felt satisfaction that Tyler and his friends were facing serious consequences for their actions, but also sadness that so much harm had been allowed to occur before anyone with authority had been willing to intervene. Her reflection was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. Emma's martial arts training automatically kicked in as she turned to identify the potential threat, her body shifting into a ready stance before her conscious mind had fully processed the situation. The approaching figure was a young woman Emma didn't recognize, probably a freshman or sophomore based on her apparent age and nervous demeanor. The girl's eyes were red-rimmed as though she had been crying, and her posture suggested someone struggling with significant emotional distress. "Are you Emma Rodriguez?" the girl asked quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard. "Yes, can I help you with something?" The girl took a shaky breath before responding. "I'm Jessica Walsh. I was a senior here last year before my family moved to Grand Junction. I heard about what happened with Tyler Morrison, and I wanted to." "Thank you." Emma felt a chill of recognition at the name. Jessica Walsh was the student David had mentioned during their first conversation about Tyler's predatory behavior, a girl whose attempted complaint had been dismissed and who had ultimately been forced to leave the school to escape ongoing harassment. "I'm sorry about what happened to you," Emma said simply. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "You did what I couldn't do. You stood up to him and made it stick. Because of you, he's finally facing consequences for what he did to me and all the care." Other girls. Emma felt the weight of unintended heroism settling on her shoulders once again. She had never sought to become a symbol of resistance against institutional corruption, but the reality was that her successful defense against Tyler's assault had opened a door that had been locked for years. "Jessica, what Tyler did to you wasn't your fault. The fact that the adults who should have protected you failed in their responsibility doesn't diminish your courage in trying to speak up." Jessica nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know that now. But at the time, I felt like I was going crazy. Everyone was acting like Tyler was this golden boy who could do no wrong, and I was just some disturbed girl making false accusations for attention." Emma recognized the gaslighting tactics that Tyler and his supporters had apparently used against previous victims. The systematic nature of the abuse extended beyond physical assault to include psychological manipulation designed to isolate and silence anyone who threatened his protected status. "The important thing is that it's over now," Emma said. "Tyler's going to prison, and the school has implemented changes that should protect future students from going through what you experienced." Jessica managed a small smile through her tears. "I heard about the new advocacy program and the reporting procedures. It gives me hope that other girls won't have to suffer in silence the way I did." As Jessica walked away, Emma reflected on the broader implications of her conflict with Tyler Morrison. What had begun as a simple case of self-defense against assault had revealed systematic, institutional failures that had enabled years of predatory behavior. Her individual act of resistance had become a catalyst for changes that would protect countless future students. Emma's phone buzzed with a text message from her mother asking about her plans for the evening. As she typed a response, Emma realized that she was looking forward to a quiet night at home for the first time since arriving in Colorado. The constant tension and hypervigilance that had defined her first months at Riverside Valley High School had finally begun to fade. The drive home took her past the Morrison Automotive dealership, where she noticed several for sale signs in the parking lot and a dramatically reduced inventory of vehicles. The scandal surrounding Tyler's criminal behavior had apparently affected his father's business more severely than Emma had expected. Emma felt a moment of sympathy for the employees and customers who were suffering consequences for crimes they hadn't committed. But she also recognized that accountability for institutional failures often extended beyond the primary perpetrators to include those who had enabled or benefited from systematic abuse. At dinner that evening, Emma's parents updated her on the ongoing legal proceedings and community reactions to the scandal. Her father had been contacted by several regional news outlets requesting interviews about his daughter's role in exposing the corruption. But the family had decided to decline media attention in favor of focusing on Emma's education and future plans. The district attorney's office called today, Emma's mother reported. Tyler Morrison has agreed to a plea deal that includes a prison sentence and mandatory counseling. He'll also be required to pay restitution to his victims and complete community service focused on anti-bullying education. Emma felt satisfaction that Tyler would face serious consequences while also having opportunities for rehabilitation and education about the impact of his behavior. The plea agreement suggested that he might actually learn from his experience rather than simply serving time and returning to society unchanged. What about Jake and Connor? Similar arrangements, her father replied, though their sentences are somewhat lighter since they were clearly following Tyler's lead rather than initiating the predatory behavior. Emma nodded, appreciating the justice system's recognition that different levels of culpability deserve different consequences. Jake and Connor had made terrible choices, but they had been influenced by Tyler's leadership and corrupted by a culture that rewarded abusive behavior with social status and protection. 3 months later, Emma stood in the renovated dance studio that had been transformed into the Tyler Morrison Prevention Center, a facility dedicated to conflict resolution and anti-bullying education. The space that had once been the site of attempted assault now served as a symbol of transformation and healing. Ms. Kim had been appointed as the center's first director, bringing her background in martial arts philosophy and her commitment to student advocacy to the role. The walls were decorated with inspirational quotes about courage, justice, and the importance of standing up for others who couldn't protect themselves. It's fitting that this is where it all started, Ms. Kim observed as Emma practiced her kata forms in the space where she had first been forced to defend herself. Tyler chose this room because he thought it was isolated and forgotten. Now it's the heart of our efforts to ensure that no student ever has to face what you experienced. Emma completed her form and bowed respectfully toward the mirror where Connor Hayes had once crashed after his failed attempt to assault her. The transformation of the space from a site of trauma to a center for healing and education represented everything she hoped her experience might accomplish. Miss Kim, do you think the changes we've implemented will actually prevent future incidents? No system is perfect, Ms. Kim replied thoughtfully, but we've created multiple layers of protection and accountability that should make it much more difficult for predatory behavior to continue unchecked. Most importantly, we've changed the culture so that victims are believed and supported rather than silenced and blamed. Emma appreciated the realistic optimism in Ms. Kim's response. The reforms implemented at Riverside Valley High School wouldn't eliminate all future incidents of harassment or assault, but they had created an environment where such behavior was much more likely to be reported, investigated, and punished appropriately. As Emma's senior year drew to a close, she found herself reflecting on the unexpected journey that had brought her from a quiet transfer student, hoping to avoid attention, to someone whose courage had fundamentally changed an entire school community. Her acceptance letters to several prestigious universities included scholarship offers specifically recognizing her advocacy work and her role in exposing institutional corruption. She chose to attend the University of Colorado Boulder, where she planned to study criminal justice with a focus on institutional reform and victim advocacy. Her experience at Riverside Valley High School had convinced her that systematic change was possible when individual courage was supported by evidence, determination, and community support. On graduation day, Emma walked across the stage to receive her diploma from Principal Thompson, who had survived the scandal and emerged as a more effective advocate for student safety. The auditorium erupted in applause that seemed to acknowledge not just her academic achievements, but her role in creating a safer environment for all students. Tyler Morrison watched the ceremony from a state correctional facility where he was serving his sentence for multiple felony convictions. His former position as homecoming king and star quarterback had been replaced by a prison uniform and the daily reality of facing consequences for his actions. Emma hoped that he was using his time to develop genuine understanding of the harm he had caused, an authentic commitment to becoming a better person. David Park graduated as valedictorian and recipient of a full scholarship to study journalism at Northwestern University. His documentation of systematic harassment had earned him recognition from professional journalism organizations and established him as a powerful voice for investigative reporting that held institutions accountable to vulnerable populations. Sofia Martinez was elected student body president by the largest margin in school history, running on a platform of transparency and continued reform that resonated with voters who had witnessed the positive changes possible when students demanded accountability from their leaders. Ms. Kim's Violence Prevention Center became a model program that was replicated in school districts throughout Colorado and beyond. Her integration of martial arts philosophy with conflict resolution techniques created a unique approach to anti-bullying education that emphasized both physical and emotional resilience. Coach Chun implemented new athletic department policies that prioritized character development alongside physical training, creating a culture where sports achievement was measured not just by wins and losses but by the integrity and respect demonstrated by student athletes. The Morrison family's influence over school policies was permanently eliminated through new district guidelines that prevented individual donors from wielding disproportionate power over disciplinary decisions. The community had learned important lessons about the dangers of allowing wealth and status to purchase immunity from accountability. As Emma drove away from Riverside Valley High School for the final time, she carried with her the knowledge that her individual act of courage had created ripple effects that would protect students for generations to come. The quiet girl with hidden martial arts skills had become a catalyst for institutional transformation that proved individual resistance could overcome even the most entrenched systems of corruption and abuse. Her legacy would live on in every student who felt safe to report harassment, every administrator who chose accountability over political convenience, and every community member who understood that true strength comes from protecting the vulnerable rather than enabling the powerful. Emma Rodriguez had come to Colorado hoping for a fresh start and instead had become the architect of a more just and safe educational environment for everyone who would follow in her footsteps. The abandoned dance studio had been transformed from a site of attempted assault into a symbol of hope and healing, proving that even spaces corrupted by violence could be reclaimed for positive purposes when communities committed to justice and accountability. Emma's story would inspire future students to stand up for themselves and others, demonstrating that courage supported by evidence and determination could overcome any obstacle. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.